Good morning, my name is Stephen Capaldo and it is Thursday, February 24th, 2022. Welcome, thank you for listening. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Russia and Ukraine. And I guess I'll be focusing on what people don't want to tell you about what's going on there. And of course, if you adhere to the view that you get all the truth from mainstream media and mainstream sources and like that, I mean there are a lot of things that you might not be aware of, or the picture will look somehow a certain way, but it's really kind of a distorted picture you're getting of what's going on. And I thought I would start a little bit by talking about the history of that territory that we call Ukraine, which is really, okay, I'll show it to you. It's right there, right next to Russia and Belarus and Moldova, and there's Crimea, and it goes into the Black Sea, Caucasus, and down that way. Not Ukraine, but that's just kind of a general area. Historically, what has happened before the Soviet Union was established in 1917, and to be more precise about it, the Soviet Union was really established by international socialist revolutionaries who came in and basically imposed a government on the people there, who were mostly not working people, working class people. It was mostly a rural agricultural society. They had just liberated their serfs not that far, but long before that. So the international socialist revolutionaries came in for, the oil and the banks and all that stuff, the usual, and established the Soviet Union, and from 1917 to 1991. And in establishing the Soviet Union, they established a number of Soviet Socialist republics, and one of these Soviet Socialist republics was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. So when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, or it ended in 1991, there were no more of these Soviet Socialist republics. So the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic ceased to exist. And then we were told we got this thing called Government of Ukraine. And okay, that's fair enough. This territory is made up of a Western Ukrainian population and an Eastern Russian population, basically. And the three territories in the east that have been the subject of all this fighting, for 8 years. One is Crimea, which signed or voted on a referendum to join the Russian Federation, and they were 96% in favor of joining the Russian Federation. And politicians don't get 96% in any vote. I mean, maybe Kim Jong-un gets it, but that's about it. So definitely Crimea wanted to be part of the Russian Federation, and then you have these other two republics, the Donbass area, the Donetsk and Lugansk areas. So you've got these three areas that are on the eastern territory, the Eastern Russian territory and the Western Ukrainian territory, two populations. Now the thing about the government of Ukraine is that apparently it's come to light, and I think we should all kind of check this out, is that Ukraine never really registered its borders with the United Nations, which would have given it the status of legal status of sovereignty under international law. So if that's true that they don't have legal sovereignty, under international law, if their borders aren't registered with the United Nations, whatever that procedure is, then you can really ask the question, well, what kind of a country is this? And especially if you look deeper into the history, if you look past what's going on now, and there's some question apparently of sovereignty, of the true sovereignty of Ukraine now, and then you look past into the history of the Soviet Union. Well, they can't be a Soviet Socialist Republic anymore because that whole thing is defunct. If you go beyond that in history, further back in history, there really, if I remember my Russian history correctly, there was not a time when this territory, this landmass, did not belong to Russia. It belonged to Russia, Mother Russia, the Russian state, the Russian Empire, whatever you want to call it. They were a territory under Russia before the Soviet Union. So there's a lot more of a history of that than there is of a history of something else. And if there is this dispute about true sovereignty for Ukraine even today, well, what are they? I mean, is it just some kind of territory that is there to enrich corrupt politicians? I mean, what really is going on there in terms of sovereignty. And these are things that people should, people, of good faith, people who are willing to be open-minded and honest and objective, these are things that people should look into, and not simply accuse people who bring these things up of some kind of, I don't know what, hatred or being a stooge for somebody. I mean, that's not it. The point is what's really going on here. The thing is, if you look into the issue of governance on this territory that's called Ukraine, if you look into the issue of governance and see what has happened the last 8 years in particular, and I don't know if it happened before that, but certainly the last 8 years, there's been a lot of foreign influence in the country. New World Order, globalist, NGO type people have influenced the country, and as well as some homegrown people, what they refer to as the KM, the Khazarian Mafia or Khazarian Mob, and this is really a small group of people that basically is part of the control structure, the governance structure now, and also, and if you look at the Khazarian Mafia, it's very few people. In other words, if you look at Euro-Asian Ashkenazi, they're fine, lovely people. If you look at Semitic and Sephardic people, they're fine, they're lovely people, that's not the issue. But there's this very small group of people. They don't like everyday Jewish people, and they don't like Gentiles. They basically are, they don't like anybody. And they're part of the governance of Ukraine. And there's also some kind of a neo-fascist activity, homegrown people inside of Ukraine. If you look up in about 2014, I think it was maybe February 2014, if you look at the Maidan Square, M-A-I-D-A-N, and see what you find, and study that a little bit, you can see that over the last 8 years at least, that this country, or whatever you want to call it, this territory has turned into a very corrupt place, very oppressive place, and it's nothing against Ukrainian people or Russian people. The issue is liberation for all people from the matrix, basically, the globalists, the New World Order, etc. And I know sometimes it comes across as a little bit harsh when you say, oh, Ukraine's not even a real country. Well, I think you have to define it a little more historically than that. But, legally speaking, under international law, that might well be true. And you can't go back to the Soviet period, because the Soviet period has gone. So what is where does this place go? What is it, this territory, what does it revert to? And the people, the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, should be able to live in freedom, in freedom and abundance and good health and all the rest of it. And it's not really the case right now. As far as the eastern territory, the Russian areas, the ethnic Russian areas, Russian speaking, well, they presumably the best thing would be that they would have some kind of choice, that if they wanted some kind of autonomy where they are, political and economic, and the right to use their language. And the thing is, these two populations, the Ukrainian population and the Russian population, they have a lot in common. The languages are not that dissimilar. They're related. They're quite similar. I mean, if you have a Russian-speaking person and a Ukrainian-speaking person, the Russian-speaking person can say something in Russian. The Ukrainian will generally understand it. Ukrainian says something in Ukrainian. The Russian speaker will generally understand it. And in that territory, a lot of them speak both. Right? So, but they're very related languages. They're very close anyway, and they have a lot of tradition. And, I got a dog over here. They have a lot of the same traditions and cultures and history and religion. So these are two people that have a lot in common. I mean, the Ukrainians and Russians have a lot more in common than some of the other former Soviet socialist republics, for example. So they should be able to live together in peace and prosperity at some point. But until this the corrupt governance is cleaned up, that's going to be very difficult. And presumably for the Donetsk and Lugansk areas, they could, as I said, they could have some type of autonomy where they are. Or they could, if they wanted, I imagine if they wanted to, move into the Russian Federation, technically, physically, that would be facilitated. The Russians would probably, facilitate that. So really, this is a story it's a very sad story, and there's a lot of fact and fiction, or things that aren't really clear, things that aren't really clarified, things that the Western media, mainstream media, they don't want you to know. But it's very difficult to talk about these things because you will be attacked as being the propaganda tool of some foreign influence and some unfriendly power and this that and the other thing. And we shouldn't make light of any country that has nuclear weapons. U.S., Russia, China, any of those countries that have nuclear weapons, they have the potential to kill a lot of people. It doesn't mean that they're planning to do that, but there is always that potential. So you don't take things lightly, but you also have to look at things in a sober and objective way, and not just keep resorting to these old propaganda things, that everything that goes wrong in the world is Russia's fault. Okay, there are maybe some people that are too much in favor of something and they're not objective about it, but then on the other hand, there are others that, they want to blame everything on this one group of people, right? And it's like I always was fascinated, I'm still fascinated with the way people still relate to Trump. You have basically two groups of extreme people. You have the hero worshippers, and I've never really been into that. But then you've got the other people that say Trump's responsible for everything bad that's ever happened. So it's neither one nor the other. I mean, we need to make some attempt to be more balanced than that. But some questions that you might be considering, you might want to take a look at in the days and weeks and months ahead, is what about NATO? The current NATO, has it outlived its usefulness, and is there a possibility of a new type of NATO that would include, for example, Russia? I think that's something that might happen. There's a possibility that will happen. I think the old NATO, it doesn't really serve any purpose, and it just complicates the situation in Eastern Europe. You have a bunch of Western countries that are involved in a situation that basically is an Eastern European situation. It wouldn't be tolerated. I mean, if somehow Canada were going to invade the United States, let's say, so the Russians came to watch and see what they could do. I mean, no, that wouldn't be tolerated. So why should all these Western countries, why should they have troops so close to Eastern Europe and what is essentially an Eastern European problem? The countries in Eastern Europe, if they feel like they need to defend themselves against someone, then they should defend themselves against someone. But it's an Eastern European issue. So the future of NATO, I think, is something that's up in the air. And even if you look at something like the United Nations has been supposed to keep the peace, and you look at what's going on in this place, no peace, and other places, Africa and other places, the Balkans for a long time, what is the role of the United Nations? If they say they're there to maintain international peace and security and they don't do it, will there eventually be some alternative to the United Nations? There was the League of Nations after World War I, and then the United Nations after World War II, and now that essentially we are in some kind of a cyber World War III, what is the role of the United Nations, of the current United Nations, going to be? I think that's a legitimate question. And I'm not necessarily giving you the answers. I think we all have to just learn things and get information and wait and see what happens. I don't have answers what's going to be with NATO, what's going to be with the United Nations. But these are questions. Another interesting question is, what about Taiwan? Depending on how the Ukraine situation gets sorted, what's going to happen to Taiwan? If they didn't have the Communist Party, where would they go? I mean, if there were no Communist Party at some point, I don't know. Is that realistic? We have to wait and see. But where would Taiwan go? They are ethnically Chinese, right? And there are other things happening behind the scenes. This part of the world where Ukraine is and all around it, and I pointed out a little bit around it just to make this final point that I'm going to make, is that it's an area of very ancient civilizations. There have been people looking for all kind of information about ancient civilizations, from Egypt and around Turkey and up, Central Asia and covering Ukraine. And so there's even been speculation that there might even be not only control for, kind of like a political control, or what's the political system is it going to be, and how much freedom will there be. There also is speculation about is there some kind of information about some ancient civilization in that part of the world? That's happened before. It could be part of the mix now. And what would be revealed in this information, and who would be in possession of this information, and what would they do with it? So I'm not saying that something is or something isn't. I think we all have to just be attentive and try to get as much information as we can and be as honest and objective as we can. It is very discouraging to see how new viewpoints, or let's say not non-traditional viewpoints, can never be brought up without resulting in some kind of an attack. But that's the way it is. That's the way it has to be. We have to do what we can to stand for truth. I mean, we are trying to seek truth and be light and be love and be upright in our behavior and to serve people, for the sake of the kingdom of God. So, okay, that's my own personal view of what's going on there. And the next couple of weeks, I'll be away. Maybe after this message, that's a good thing, to be away. But so the next couple of weeks, I don't know. There may be a message, there may not. I may come back with another message, let's say sometime around the third week of March. We'll just see how it goes. But I wish you well, and stay healthy and everything else, and keep looking for truth and looking to be truth in your behavior. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.